Everyone. I hope you had a good spring break. This is going to be a video about Reconstruction. I know you covered a bit about this with Mr. Q before spring break, so some of this will be review, some of it is some more detail. Reconstruction is a huge event, a huge issue, a huge thing in U.S. history. There's nothing um, small about it. There's nothing insignificant about it. So it really is not sufficient to make it into a video. And I'm actually going to split this into two videos because it is such a big issue. Those will be the last two videos of the unit. And then our closing assessment will be on Reconstruction. So if you have questions on this, you want to make sure that you ask me about it. And we're going to be competing with the health room next door. Sounds like they're listening to a video about hormones, so hopefully that won't distract from this too much. But Reconstruction. So this is after the Civil War, right? And all these issues come up with Reconstruction. Everything that dealt with secession and union and all constitutionality. Who's responsible for it? Are states responsible? Or is the federal government responsible? Is it the legislative branch? Is it the executive branch? Is it all the branches? What do we do with now that we have 4 million freed African Americans now, right? All right, you're free. Now what? You're going to go buy a house with what money, right? How do you take care of those scenarios? How do you rebuild the South? Do they have to do it by themselves? Should they get help? Should they be punished? Right? There were all conflicting views on all these sorts of questions. So someone who did not want the South punished because he wanted a whole union was President Lincoln. And you learned a little bit about his 10% plan, which he established in 1863. So his goal was to end the war. It wasn't to punish the South. It was to end the war and preserve the Union. So his plan was that of the people that voted for secession and stuff in 1860, 10% of them should take a loyalty oath, which is, a fairly small percentage. And once 10% took it, the state could set up a legal government with a new state constitution, and that constitution had to recognize the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery, right? States like Louisiana and Arkansas took advantage of this, and they were readmitted in 1864, which is before the Civil War even ended. Now, radical Republicans were in Congress, and they refused to seat those congressmen, so this didn't really go so smoothly. Under his plan, it would pardon all but high-ranking officials. There's some confusion with that. It also avoided the vote issue with African Americans. He privately advocated that elite blacks should be able to vote. But what the heck does that mean? Does that mean ones in the North, ones that own land? Well, what does that mean? It avoided issues with African Americans in education and land reform, right? Were they going to get land now or what? Now, of course, we all know what happened in April 14th, 1865. That's the activity we did for Monday's class, and he really isn't able to see the fruits of Reconstruction, either good or bad. So we have another view of Reconstruction. We have the Wade-Davis bill, which was in 1864. This put the Congress in charge, which would be the legislative branch, right? And unlike 10%, it wanted 50% of voters to take a oath of loyalty here. So you see this political cartoon on the right addresses the difference of the plans between Lincoln and the Wade-Davis bill. Now, when it came to this plan, Lincoln used what's known as a pocket veto. He didn't support language in this bill. It said that Southern states must rejoin the Union. Why is rejoin language he didn't like? Well, because he said they were constitutionally not allowed to succeed, so they technically never left. So how can they rejoin? He also said that the Wade-Davis bill would jeopardize emancipation movements that were happening among states, specifically loyal border states like Missouri and Maryland, and that this bill would threaten to destroy this fragile political coalitions which Lincoln started to construct very carefully between the moderates in both the North and the South. You don't want to destroy that relationship. This bill also really didn't realize how different Lincoln was as a Republican versus the radical Republicans, um, especially in their view of the Confederates. Lincoln thought that you need to sort of coax the Confederates back, get them into a peaceful coexistence, right? He was all about preserving this union. And the Wade Davis bill was like, no, these people are traitors and they have to be punished, right? What's the best way to go from there, right? Um, Lincoln ended up, like I said, killing that bill with a pocket veto, and it was never resurrected. Now, his relationship with Congress reached a low here. I think the film clip we watched Monday showed that, Abraham Lincoln, who we highly revere today, wasn't so much revered right at this time. His relationship with Congress was low. And a large part of it was they thought he was just being too nice, let's say, to the Confederacy afterwards. But what was his goal, right? His goal was for union. We next have Johnson's plan, the Democrat from Tennessee, and he viewed Reconstruction as a way to destroy the power of the planter class in the South, not really as a means to, hey, let's embrace the humanity of African Americans now, right? A lot of Reconstruction still wasn't dealing with what to do with former slaves. It was about the, the different classes of white people, let's say, in the South. Now, Johnson continued with Lincoln's plan, but added to it a list of individuals that would have to seek pardons personally. And basically, it was anyone with over $20,000 in taxable property, and they would have to answer to him. So think of that as the planter class. The states could be readmitted to the Union if they took a loyalty oath to the people of the state, and the state ratified the 13th Amendment. Johnson's plan did not punish anyone, right? He had over 13,500 personal pardons. In the end, Jefferson Davis was imprisoned for 2 years. Other Confederate leaders weren't. There were no trials for treason. Only one person in the whole war was executed for war crimes, and that was Captain Henry Wirz. And he was committed of crimes because he was the commandant of the prison camp in Andersonville, Georgia. And remember that lesson on those camps and just how harsh they were. It did not demand a loyalty oath of leaders. And once again, it didn't address former slave needs, land, voting rights, education, any of that. So by 1865, all states except Texas complied with these conditions. Now, the radical Republicans were not happy about this because Johnson did not destroy the slaveholders, did not distribute land, worry about vote, education, like I said. And they really thought Johnson was trying to control and manipulate the Congress. Not happy about it. We have Congressional Reconstruction, which was done by the 40th Congress, and it was led by both moderate and radical Republicans. The leaders of it were Thaddeus Stevens, Charles Sumner, and George Julian. Parts of this will include things like the Freedmen's Bureau. Now that you have freed men, right, what are you going to do so that they can live free? What are you going to do about food and clothing? They did set up 40 hospitals, over 4,000 schools. Johnson vetoed this. Congress did override it. Then we have the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which said everyone had equal protection under the law. And it ends the black codes that said things like African Americans cannot have guns or sit on jury or testify against whites or marry whites or own businesses. You still have Jim Crow, right? And that's another issue, a huge, awful issue to deal with. We also have the Reconstruction Act of 1867, which divided the former Confederacy into 5 military districts to make sure these things were being happened out, to help with the writing of new state constitutions. Then we have 2 more Reconstruction amendments. You have the 13th Amendment, which dealt with slavery, then the 14th and the 15th Amendment. And the 14th one was about due process to the law and equal protection. The 15th was about the right to vote. That came about in 1870. And that also came along with enforcement acts, which were passed to protect blacks from the violence of groups like the KKK, who would attack people if they dare do something like try to vote. It put elections actually also under the jurisdiction of the federal government, and it gave fines and jail terms for those who tried to interfere with citizens' rights to vote. So just a few more things I want to speak about is the Tenure of Office Act, how Reconstruction did happen in the South, and its failures and its successes.